So, welcome to the wonderful world of Deuteros. This is, as you saw in the intro there, a very old Amiga game, also available on the Atari ST. Smiling somewhat to myself because it's been nearly 30 years since I played this, and I've just watched Star Trek Picard Season 3 Episode 1, so it's all very nostalgic this evening. What is this game? It's sort of a turn-based space strategy sim. And as you can see, it's got a bit of a sense of humour to it, because this is just the intro screen before you actually touch anything. It's just got all these wonderful little blips and blobs and periscopes and shutters and stuff happening. And I remember being quite impressed by this right from the get-go, just because it had this sort of little sense of humour to it, which means that somebody really sort of cared about it. So I'm going to show you some of the elements of the gameplay of this. If you're from the modern era, this will seem completely antiquated to you. But this game has always stuck in my head because it's got a real feel to it. Because it has a storyline to it. A lot of it will seem quite repetitive, but then just as things become repetitive, it finds a way to automate it for you, which I always really appreciated. It's very, very clever like that. But I'm going to jump us in at a point where I've done most of the sort of dull stuff in terms of setting up some bases and getting ready for a conflict which I know is coming. And I'm going to go through the conflict a couple of times in terms of how it starts, and you'll see that there are different entry points into it, which again is quite clever because it just means it's kind of, how you play the game immediately impacts the way in which things happen. Now, there is just a minute ago, this played an intro when I went into it, but because it's under emulation on a PC screen, I think it's a little bit glitchy, so I'm not entirely sure if it will do the intro a second time for you. So if it doesn't, apologies, I'll just get straight into it. This is emulating an Amiga, which I've bought the ROMs for. Here's the intro, it's worked. And yes, this is all sprites. Now, I think this is probably backstory. This is actually the sequel to a game called Millennium 2.0, I think it was called. And I never actually played that. That might be my next thing to try. But I think this is an alien race called the Methanoids leaving the solar system, I think. This is what we had in the 1991. This was it. So your imagination plays a big part in it. Great music and stuff though, you've got to give it to them for the time. The Amiga excelled at music. Now I think that's Earth that's been sort of bombed to pieces basically. But you do start on Earth, and that's where you have to build up from. Yeah, that's the first time I've watched all the way through that. Now I think it might be restarting. I'm going to assume this is repeating. Let's move on. Okay. So here's some little. I'll do the load screen in a second, but some little details here which again make me smile. This is where you sort of start off training people, and this little light switch actually works. I love that. It's this little detail. It's brilliant, brilliant. Right, let's move things along a little bit. Now, I think this is the right one. So, what we've got here is various not IOSs. These are orbital factories. So I've got one at the Earth, one at the Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars. And for the time being, that's as many as I can do without triggering something, and I can show you why. And I'm going to come at this for a few different angles. So I've got various ships here that are doing automatic runs. Some are mining in the asteroids, some are transferring resources between these various orbital factories to sort of balance things out. And what I'm going to try and do is make first contact. So this is an IOS, an interplanetary operations ship, and you have to create a chassis and a drive section, which is back here. You bring that up, you fuel it up as much as you choose to, and then you have various module slots that you can install here. Now I know already, because I've played it before, that I need a grapple. You can see there are various things I could put in here. So there's an orbital factory frame. You need 8 orbital factory frames to make an orbital factory, so that's a bit tedious, but again, once it's there, it's there. Derricks mine on the surface of planets to give you resources. Band-Aid is quite a specialised thing, you only ever use it on the Moon, and that's an asteroid mining piece of kit which some of my ships have been equipped with to, well, you know, mine asteroids. Now, I already know what I'm going to do here, so I'm going to put some deuterium in here, and here you can see my available resources, because I want something to trade with, although thinking about it, the first visit I won't be able to, the second visit I will be able to. Okay, so that's that. Now I'm going to need, where am I? I'm in Earth. I'm going to need a pilot. I need a crew. So happily, the shuttle is docking with the Earth orbital factory at the moment. So I'm going to tell it to complete its cycle, advance time once, and those are the graphics that indicate that you are now docked up. So you can see space is sort of out there, but I still quite like the details. So what I'm going to do is select servicing. I'm going to click in vacant, and that will move the crew from the ship to the available crew rosters there on the left. Now I can set this going again. It doesn't actually need a crew to do what it's doing, because it has an automated cargo computer in ACC. So I just tell it to do this, and it'll launch itself out. The fact it says storm doors, like, what? Where are you going to get storms from? But anyway, so that's going to sort itself out now. And I will go back to the space dock, put the Admiral onto the ship, and then launch the ship. And then I'm going to set a course. And I'm going to set a course to Jupiter. Because at Jupiter are the Methanoids. And before we start chatting to them, I need to understand their language. So I'm advancing time now, as you can see, because it takes a while to travel inside the solar system. So as you can see, this indicates that this is not my orbital factory, basically. This is a Methanoid. And that looks like one of my orbital factories. They are very, very similar. there's nothing there to tell you who they are, but I'm gonna dock up here. When I do, now nothing actually happens at this point. So basically, you get a load of gibberish, and they put something into my grapple pod, and they chuck me out of the station. So I'm automatically launching out, but here I have an unknown item in my hydraulic grapple. So all I'm going to do now is go home. And once I've gone home, my eggheads will have something that they can analyse. So I'm back at my orbital factory at Earth. I dock up, and as you can see, there's something in the grapple now. Okay, so items removed. I go back to Earth City, go back to research, communication adapter. So as you see, every day it goes up about 10%, it doesn't take too long to do. And now I have a comms pod. Now, one of the slightly annoying things about this is that it doesn't really tell me what this does on this page, despite it being the sort of the research page. I don't think there's a way for me to do it, which is ironic. But if I go into stores and comms pod, it tells me here. Methanoid origin translates verbal communication into HUD text. Technical analysis also reveals holographic imaging processing. Okay, so what we do now is go back to Earth, and now I can produce one. You'll see here that I have an automated operations computer. These are quite useful because normally you would need humans in here to actually do your production, but once you can build these, they can take over. So at the moment, more or less everything I've got is automated, and that's going to produce a comms pod for me. I'm just checking. Now actually, here's an instance where I haven't done that yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to swap one of these pods. That is a good point, well made. So if I can swap the pod, it's got to be empty, which is fair enough. And what I'm going to do is I need to find, I think it's, yes, so it's Mercury that needs it, but I think Venus has a spare crew that I can borrow. Yes, there we go. So what I'm going to do is launch this iOS. I said Venus, didn't I? Yeah. That should work. Okay. So we're going to go to Venus. Shouldn't take too long. I'm not even sure I've set up my inner solar system as well as I might have done. Because... Okay, so... the artisans are aboard, because when it comes down to battling, the transit time between the planets is quite important, and it can take a little while to get from A to B. So Venus to Mercury is 4 days. That's probably okay. So I'm going to put the artisan there, which moves them out of the cryopod here, which yes, it does look like a brain. And I'm going to go to production. Once I've done this, then they're in this crew roster here, click on them, they disappear, and they're in the production. And now here I'm going to produce an officer operations computer. And as soon as that's in place, they'll then move back into the hangar section. And then, as you can see, that's replaced them, so they're good to go again. And I will probably pull them out from here and just take them back with me. I tend to be, the way I've got this rigged, it's quite Earth-centric. So most of my production and my sort of surplus items tend to be at Earth at the moment. That will change, but... So I was going to empty that so I can put my supply pod back in. I always just like this bit. Just the sound effects. It's the attention to detail, I think, as much as anything else. That you get sound effects for every little thing that happens. Now, instead of the grapple, what I now want is a comms pod. So we'll slot that in, and now it's again different graphic. So you've got the tool pod here, which then mounts various options for you. So I've got the comms pod, so now I can go back and at the moment we haven't traded at all. So let's do a little trade count here, because just trying to think where I would like to. Let's save it in this slot here. When I initially started saving, it was a little bit questionable. It took quite a while to save it. Once you've actually created a save slot, it seems to be fine, but I don't know whether or not this will at some point fall over under the emulation. I just don't know. So I'm going to set off again. I'm going to go back to Jupiter, and as you'll see, this time round we have a little bit more of a chat. But basically, by doing this, I'm setting a bit of a clock running. Because now, see, I quite like the animation on his face even. They're very, very polite at this point. Okay, so basically, they swap what you've got in your supply pods for something that they want to give you. It varies by element, so I don't mine helium at the moment. In fact, the Jupiter, which this station is orbiting, is one of the few places in the solar system you can get helium. So for me, getting helium now makes sense. So I have done one trip thus far to get something from them, and what I'm going to do is just keep playing until such time as bad things start happening. And it does take a little while. In fact, it's going to be about 15 trips worth. So I'm going to count this down, but I'm not going to bore you with it. So I'm going to pause here, and I'll do a little jump cut back to you when I've got to about 14 or so. Okay, welcome back. A short time later. Now, I am doing reasonably well. I think I've done about 13 trips out. So I'm again going back to Jupiter, and we're going to see whether or not I've counted correctly any second. If I'm right, yeah, that's okay. So I haven't triggered it yet, but I think my next trip I will do. So I've accumulated a reasonable amount of helium from them now, because I've done quite a few trips back and forth, which is the aim of the game here. But I think if I've got this right, on my next trip back, I should find that I get a somewhat different response. I've done a few other bits in the background as well, just so I can trigger a couple of other options so you can see how this works. So I'm just swapping out the helium for deuterium to go back with. But I suspect that this time round, the reception will not be quite as warm. If, as I say, I've actually got this right. And I am going by something that I read online, but what you tend to find with this game is that things top out at either sort of 8 or 15. I'm guessing because to do with 16-bit systems at the time, that was, those were sort of nice numbers for them to handle, is my guess. So I'm now docked up again. No, we're still going. Okay. That's interesting. So either I've miscounted, or the information I read was wrong. One of the two. So let me just try and tip it over the edge with this next one. You can see the trip from Earth to Jupiter and back is quite tedious time-wise. So if you didn't have the advanced time option, it would be a pain. You can advance a day by clicking here, you know, every time you want to advance a day, basically. So you can do it that way as well, but the automated version of it is much more straightforward. Okay, so it's hopefully the last time, because it may be that it's not 15 but 16, because the first time I visited them may or may not count, because that was when I actually got the translator. They got the comms pod then. So let's see what they say now. Interesting. It's still not triggering it. Now, there is the possibility that this is an emulation issue, because I have triggered it another way. So let's just keep going a couple more times, but I don't think I'm that far off. I mean, I don't think it matters what you carry. I'm purely going by the number of round trips that you make. That's, I believe, is the trigger. But maybe it just doesn't work in this version. I don't know. Let's try. Here we go. So there you go. So this guy turns traitor and basically says that they're preparing for war, and here's an example of a prototype weapon for you, but you best leg it. I am launching. Right, just go then. Okay, news bulletin. Oh, so I was actually under attack then. That's just as well I figured out how to get going. So I'm now on course to Earth. I seem to be in decent... Yeah, I'm still okay. That's good. Now, I don't know if at this point whether I can actually... No, so I've got to get back in one piece, basically, before I can research anything else. Here we go. Now this is also a very important piece of the game, this bit, because this has to do with the actual completion of the game, and it happens as soon as the Methanoids become aggressive towards you. And as you can see, it's complete and utter gibberish, but all will ultimately become clear. It's just that your research guy doesn't have a clue at the moment, basically. I don't think you can even research. No, you can't even research anything on that yet. I'm just moving it on manually so that when my trading ship gets there, you can see again we've got this grapple graphic, which is slightly different because there's an object in it. Now there's not. So if I go back to Earth City now and research, I can now you see, this is the only way in which you get the Methanoid fusion laser in your sort of research list. That is the only branch down which you get it. Now, I don't know if it actually affects anything else, or whether you just research this first and then that then allows you to sort of move on from that position. It's just a slightly different way of getting it as compared to other options. So, of course, I didn't get any deuterium that time. I'm going to get rid of that pod, and I'm going to get rid of the grapple, because as you'll see shortly, this is where things start getting interesting. So now I can take off like this, that's not a problem. It's just a sort of skeleton of a ship now, but that doesn't matter. So you've got the research going. I've just cleared that space dock so that my other iOSs that are doing supply runs can get in and out. If you leave a ship docked in there, obviously they're stuck basically. And again, that's interesting because that's a slightly different message to the one that you get otherwise, because basically they research the laser, but you can't fit it to your normal ship, so they have to do something else. Whereas when it happens a different way, they don't have the laser to start with, so they research it down a different sort of branch. So you might remember this bit if you're familiar with the game. I don't know, but there were different ways of doing it, so you could opt to play it through in different ways each time and get a slightly different response. Okay, so he's gone again. So we'll do some more research. So now we have a fuzz. Here they call it a fuzz laser, which is interesting because again that's a sort of separate. That's a separate laser item, which implies it can be developed, produced separately, but I don't think it can be. So now we're going to research the actual drone fleet control computer. Try saying that quickly. But you see, there isn't a production option for the fuzz laser. That's not a thing. But I do wonder whether or not that allows you to go down a couple of other branches that you don't otherwise get. It's possible. And the other interesting thing to know is this probably takes longer to get you to a battle-ready position than would otherwise be the case, because you can't jump to this item which you need immediately. So that's your drone fleet control computer, which you definitely need, and these are your iOS battle drones which you can produce. So what I'm going to do now is produce a drone control computer in maybe just Earth and the Moon for now, and I'll move them elsewhere. But the problem is when you equip these, as you'll see, they chew up a huge amount of fuel. But as soon as that's completed, I'll show you this, because this is quite impressive. So we'll dock this ship back up, and it's got an Admiral on board, which means the drones will have maximum combat effectiveness. But I'm going to service it, and what I'm going to put in here, okay, so you need so you put up an empty tool pod, but then you equip it with a DFCC, and then this happens. So this takes up every slot on your iOS. So once you've done that with an iOS, that's it. It ain't doing anything else. And you can see that sucks up fuel at the rate of knots. So if you start with 134, going up by 8 actually takes 8T. So to fill this up takes 2,500, which, quite frankly, I don't have. Now, fortunately, you don't. I mean, you do have to run these around a fair bit, actually. But trying to fuel them all up is really tricky. But I've got a lot of fuel spread around the place, which is why. So it will balance itself out by taking a lot from here. I'll end up with more brought in, but it does suck that dry pretty rapidly, which is why I've chosen to do it there and on the Moon only, because this way, when I put another ship in here, and fortunately I had another Admiral waiting in the wings there, so both of these ships will have maximum firepower when it comes down to it. And as you can see, this has still got 1123 of fuel left, so again I can give that a reasonable amount of fuel, enough for it to do what it needs to do. Now, whoops, would help if I put an engine light. And this is the thing, so you have to think about these things. It doesn't do it all for you. You do have to still have your head screwed on. So research-wise, we've nearly produced drones now. Now we can. So you can see the drones are quite resource-heavy, but that's what we're going for. And what I would now do is this, and basically I just switch that to green. And switching that to green basically means you keep going until you can't produce any more of them. And this is the most resource-intensive thing that you really have to do up until this point, because to get on a war footing, you've got to do this. So that is a reasonable place to be in to start the conflict with the Methanoids. So you've got your drones are set up. You're going to produce drones at all of your factories as fast as you can, and I would probably put an attack ship, say at Venus, so it can probably get to Earth and Mercury in order to defend it. And obviously I'll leave one at Earth as well, so that you can then defend both Earth and the Moon really easily just with one. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to save here. Let's save there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and do something else, and you'll see that the path then becomes a little bit different. So if I load this game in, so this is just before I was about to annoy the Methanoids for the last time, so now I'm going to do something slightly different. So I'm going to change all these pods out again, but what I'm going to do this time is something completely different. You'll have noticed that obviously there are a lot of other planets in the solar system, and a lot of other moons in the solar system as well, for that matter. And that means there are still a lot of other places I can expand to if I choose to. But of course, I've now made first contact with Methanoids, so they are not necessarily going to appreciate me taking up more real estate. I can't actually remember if they immediately have a crack at me for this or not, but we're just going to set up, I'm going to try and set up shop around Focus, which is a surprisingly large amount of time to drive to. So you see, I just start activating equipment pods there. Okay, nothing's happened immediately. So what you could do is have a few orbital factories kind of nearly ready to go, and then just trigger them, because that definitely hasn't annoyed them yet. But once I've online this, you can see that this is the sort of part of the game that does get a bit tedious. You've got to do a lot of clicking around the place to get one factory online, and you've got to produce it all. And the number of times you think you've set a ship going somewhere, and then you realise that you haven't, and you've just been sort of letting the time tick on without actually achieving anything. That does happen. But the pace of games was just different. I mean, this is not a fast-paced game, as you can see, but I like the development of it. I like the fact that it had a tech tree, and the tech tree was very logical, and I got it. And there was the Methanoid backstory going on, and then you got this weird message when you first contacted, when the Methanoids got aggressive with you, and you have no idea what that's about for ages. So again, there's just that little bit of sort of mystique to it, which doesn't rely on anything graphical or technical. It's just good story writing, and I think that's always been the case with games, and it's especially the case with games now. If you don't have a decent sort of backstory running in the background, then it's why bother putting the time and effort into playing it in the first place? You could link two Amigas together and get head-to-head multiplayer games like Stunt Car Racer, I once did, and Armageddon as well, but by Psygnosis. But you know, 2 players was as many as you were going to get together on an Amiga. So you know, multiplayer just wasn't a thing back then. So this is the depth of the single player games is really important here. So here we go. So he's unhappy. I love the way his eyebrows move. Just that little tiny graphical touch that conveys quite a lot of annoyance on his part. So now we're at war again. I could just dock up here, but obviously there's nothing here. I mean, again, the whole sort of getting a orbital factory up and running bit is quite tedious. But you'll see here that we don't have anything to do yet. So I'm going to send that back to Earth, and I'll just leave Phobos there. Phobos is basically cannon fodder at this point. Now Wheeler pipes up. So you see, that is a completely different message to the one we got last time when we got the Methanoid fusion laser from the Methanoids. So here, Wheeler says, "Don't worry, we've come up with something, boss." And we then develop our drones and our drone control computers off our own bat. So now when I go to research here, see there is no fusion laser to research, it just doesn't exist. But we do have the drone fleet control computer, so you immediately jump to that as a concept. And again, we've received a very strange transmission. Again, we've seen this before. So the branches meet at this point. So that's always going to be a thing, basically. Your crews do increase in rank as they get more experience. So ideally, you want admirals running around at this point because they will give you more combat effectiveness. So again, exactly the same thing, same tech, iOS battle drone there, and so on and so forth. So that's how you arrive at it that way. So the only real advantage there is that you can create another orbital factory, and if you're smart, you can kind of jump to that straight away. Now, I'll just finish off by showing you a little trick that I learned with this game. I'm just trying to think if there's a third way of doing it. You see, you can't attack the Methanoids until you've either got a laser from them or they've declared war on you. And obviously, if you're overly expansionistic, then they will have a go at you. Even though you've got trading relations with them, they'll still declare war as soon as you put your 6th orbital factory up, because they decide that's a step too far, basically. You could keep on putting them up now; it won't affect anything. But you are already at war with them at this point. So I think the intention is that once you hit 6 factories, it's go time, basically, and you've just got to start entering into combat with them ultimately. Let me just show you this, because this is quite a cool thing to do. Now, did I save it at this one? Let's hope so. Yes. Okay. So what you can do is this. And I don't know how widely known this was, but what I have here is an iOS with no drones, but with a computer on board it. Now, if I now empty this down, so it's got 18 units of fuel on board, then I order it to take off. It's already set to go to Jupiter. And so we're now down to 17 tons of fuel. I'm just trying to think whether or not this is actually going to Yeah, actually this might not be such a bright idea, because you could sacrifice the Admiral, but I'm not sure that you need to. So, what happens now is quite interesting, because basically you're flying along to Jupiter, fuel's going down, but if you look at here, the time is 638, your ETA is 648, but I'm going down 1 fuel ton every time unit. So when I get down to 0 fuel, engine disengages, and now I'm drifting because my ETA goes up to 653, but I am still going to get there. This is where it gets interesting. So I have a battleship with no drones, I'm now at Jupiter, and I'm falling to Jupiter, but the station's still there, and I know the station's there. So if I now dock, you can see, I can now see the station, but I haven't been engaged. I'm not under attack, I'm just docking. Now there's this panic button there. Now I'm under attack. And I can't launch. And boom. But that boom means that that factory is destroyed. And Wheeler is saying there should be an on-off switch somewhere for that panic self-destruct option. But by doing that, you don't need any drones to do that. So if you know where their stations are, you can fly a battleship on low fuel into the solar system, land it, if you already know where you're going, land it at one of their orbital factories, dock with no drones active, and just take over the factory later. I'm pretty sure that's how it works. But in that instance, all I have to do is drift in with no drones, dock. The station blows up because you can't disarm the self-destruct yet, but you do get the self-destruct tech, and then you can disarm the self-destruct, and then you can just start pinching their orbital factories without even putting up a fight. So it's quite a cunning shortcut, that. I was quite proud of myself when I can't even remember how I figured that out. I can't remember if I read it somewhere. I didn't have the internet back then, so it was all down to magazines in those days as to where you got your tips from. That's a friend told you. So yeah, so that was the beginning of war in Deuteros, and that was pretty much all there was to it. You develop various other things. There are a couple of little sort of subplots to it, like piracy, and one of the reasons I've finally gotten round to emulating this game after years and years. I never captured the pirates, and I am determined that this time round I'm going to try and capture the pirates. So I'm hoping it actually happens. I've no idea what the triggers are for this, but I am going to try and do that at some point when I have time. And if I manage it, I will try and film it, because it would be cool if I could do it. So after all these years, so there you go. Little life goals after all these years. So yeah, I mean, if you want to try and do this yourself, you know, obviously there are various sites out there. I would recommend that you have a look at a video I'm going to link in the description, because that was invaluable for me getting the emulator up and running. You can get Kickstart ROMs for the Amiga for a tenner, give or take. So it's not an expensive thing to do, but you know, there are loads of Amiga games out there that are available for emulation, and I've been really impressed by how this looks on a modern screen. You know, it's a good piece of emulation kit. There's no two ways about it. The software is really good. I am using I think it's Win UAE. Seems to be a fairly popular one. So, you know, let me know in the comments if you've got any questions. If you remember the game, obviously let me know. If you want to recommend anything similar to it, go for it. And you better leave me to battle the Methanoids on your behalf, I suppose. Cheers for now.